Hi, this Hi, this is Ed again in San Diego. As you can see behind me, it stopped raining and the rainbow is out there. I actually took this picture about a year and a half ago in August after a rainstorm, very unusual for San Diego. A rainbow appeared. And this is from Coronado at the ferry landing overlooking the downtown San Diego. And in between is the harbor, this portion of it. And to my right, your left, I guess, is the Coronado Bridge, but you can't see it in this picture. But that is actually one of the best pictures I snapped using my phone. Didn't have to doctor it up at all. And I wanted to show it off. By the way, I'm launching reviving the magazine San Diego Bound Relocation Guide, but it's only going to be online. And more about that later, but I thought I'd just show this picture. With us today, Rigoberto Vasquez from Mexico City. Welcome.
Thank you, Ed.
Oh, Chris Exline from Ukraine, I think. That's where he is today. That's good. I didn't expect that. And Christian Turnedin from Orange County, California, just back from bringing his daughter to school. Thank you. And Ken Lloyd from San Fernando Valley, LA. Welcome again.
Thank you.
Chris Exline, are you in Ukraine?
I am.
Well,
Greetings.
greetings,
Hello.
and glad
Oh,
you're well.
hey, Christian. Hey,
You're
hey, Ken.
well
Hey,
and
Stephen.
well and happy and alive. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and Stephen Howard in Phoenix today. So I think that condo has heat, but I don't think I've ever put it on. So in case you need that. Okay, today's show is about success. And what does success mean? Well, to some, it's a matter of staying alive. And in others, it's more about making money. And still others, it could be about finding happiness and spiritually and other things. So Stephen Howard has his latest book, which he's going to talk about in just a minute. That's front cover, the real thing. And there's a whole lot of pages in here in big type. Thank you for making it big type. Why don't you tell us about this new book, Stephen? Humanity Mindset.
Humanity Mindset. Thank you, Ed. The concept of the book, actually, I'm going to share a slide here if I could.
Okay, great.
Because this is a quotation from an English cleric, the Church of England from the 19th century. And it stimulated my thinking for the book. And he wrote, never, if possible, lie down at night without being able to say, I have made one human being at least a little wiser, a little happier, or a little better this day. And I thought, what a wonderful way to approach life and think about how we interact with each other. And then in my thinking, we live in such a divisive world. Everyone is spring-loaded, half-cocked, ready to go off at any moment. We had Mahibi on, talking with her the other day, and she used a great phrase called everyone's got an inner volcano that's just like ready to spew. And that's not a way to live. And so I took the concept of humanity, which I originally applied to leadership about being a people-centric leader, and now trying to apply it to people's everyday lives, the way we interact with one another, the way we approach one another, the way we do things for each other. And they could be simple things. I mean, reposting somebody's post on LinkedIn, which helps the algorithm, gets their posts viewed by more people. It's just a way of being kinder, showing compassion to each other. And that's why I enjoy being on these programs, Ed, because I know I walk away a little wiser from them, and I'm hoping that I can make not just the other panelists a little wiser, but your audience as well. So that's my view.
Well, I thank you for being here and saying that. I'm on page 176 of the book. It's right there. I know you can't see it. And there's a chart, Stephen, that caught my eye when I was looking at it last night. And so ego-driven desires versus humany mindset pursuits. That's just great use of words. Okay, so the first line, page 176, under ego-driven desires, focus on self versus the humany mindset pursuit, greater good for others and humanity. That's really like something out of a hippie thing, isn't it?
Well, I never left I never left the 70s, Ed. I'm not sure I want to, quite frankly, but
It's like I remember smoking stuff and thinking that way. I shouldn't say that on global TV here, but
yeah, well, that's
okay.
that. In a nutshell, that's kind of what the gist of the book is. And, to me, it's a way of defining success. I mean, you define your success in life. I mean, Jackie Robinson, the baseball player, Hall of Fame baseball player, he said something along the lines of, your life only has purpose when you're helping others, or something along those lines. And so my concept here, and it goes, we live in a world where WIIFM, what's in it for me, is like at the forefront of everyone's brain. And we evaluate everything on what's the impact to me? What does this mean for me? What's in it for me? And if we would just pause and start to think about our interactions with each other and the emotional wakes that we create. Let's say I have a conversation with Chris, and maybe we disagree on something, but how we approach that disagreement, we can either walk away with an emotional wake where we're angry at each other or disrespectful to each other, or we could walk away with saying, okay, Chris has a different perspective. He's had a different life journey than mine. I respect him as a human being. I may not agree with his views, but I can respect him as a human being, and I can respect the fact that he has the right to his views. And that's the emotional wake. And if we think about all of our interactions, what is that emotional wake we're leaving with other people, and how can we be more intentional about those emotional wakes? I think we could define our life as more successful.
So I'm not going to belabor the point here, but everybody, you should go to page 176. Take a look at this. It's really interesting. It's timeless. And this show is not political, but geopolitics is certainly impacting everything that I'm involved with these days. So under ego-driven desires is selfishness / entitlement versus the humany mindset pursuit, gratitude, humility. Now, I watched the CNN show the other night with Vice President Harris being interviewed, and the contrast that was drawn between the personality that she displayed during that show, I hope it was authentic, it certainly looked it, versus the stuff coming from the former President Trump lately is exactly right here in this chart. So I hope she's honest, because that would certainly be helpful and needed, but time will tell. So this is all, she's from San Francisco, and which means that's the epicenter of free thinking and free spirit and the Grateful Dead and others. And you've just hit on that just perfectly for this boomer.
Yeah, I didn't think of it from a political standpoint. And this book is very personal to me. And if you see the book, you'll see I've put a little personal message up front. I do my best to try and live a human mindset, but I'm not perfect. And even today I make mistakes. But what I had in mind here, and this is what I've been so guilty of in my own life over the years, is this sense of entitlement. Hey, I'm a lifetime gold frequent flyer on Qantas, lifetime. And so I've treated people poorly. I've talked to customer reps and said, "Hey, I'm the customer. Or I'm lifetime gold." I mean, I've had people try not to allow me into the American Airlines lounge, which is what I'm entitled to as a lifetime Qantas Gold member. But I could be more humble about that. I could be more, have show some humility. Some people may not know all the rules. They may not, and this is what I've had to learn, that they don't understand that, yes, I have the so-called right, as one of my benefits of that lifetime goal, to use American Airlines lounges everywhere in the world. But I used to be arrogant about it. I used to be self-righteous, like this is my self-righteous entitlement. And I'm just trying to take a more humble approach in my own life and tone myself down in this book. So helping others understand that. So that's the background where I came to that conclusion of going from being entitled to, hey, be appreciative. I'm lucky that I can use the lounge. I can be on the cheapest airline ticket in the world on American Airlines. I still get to use the first class lounge. I should be grateful for that, not entitled and self-righteous, if that makes sense.
Let's go to Chris Exline. So your background is different, that's for sure, and your life experience is different than mine and many others. And yet you have chosen to find success staring evil in the eye and extending your person and your position at great risk, seemingly, to help others. Man, you're doing God's work, I'll tell you, because I don't know anybody else who's doing that
Well, I
anywhere.
I know millions of others in this country that are doing far more than I. And before I get started, Stephen, thank you for admitting that I was right in our recent thing. Your your humility is something that, and humility actually is the one attribute I'm most proud of in myself. If I brag about anything to people, it is my humility. But no, in all seriousness, when you say staring evil, I would say when I stared evil in the face, I would say that was myself. I would say for years and years.
This is getting too heavy here. Wait a minute. What are you talking
Well,
about?
yeah, I'll burst into Andy Williams singing "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother" in just a moment, and then we can see how nice and civil everybody is when I try to sing like Andy Williams. But no, what I'm getting at is, for as long as you've known me, Ed, no matter what I would say, my singular quest was to build Home Essentials into the largest furniture rental company in the world, and that was the overarching goal, 7 days a week for 25 some odd years. And even when that started to collapse, that mindset or mentality didn't necessarily go away. So, Stephen and Ken are probably more versed in this than I, but when you have founding CEOs, even when they've been stripped of what was once a large company, it doesn't necessarily mean the ego goes away or the thought process goes away. And it's not the catharticness of something collapsing. I mean, even you brought up God. I mean, you bring up the book of Job. Even in chapter 29, Job is still lamenting and thinking about the days when people would respect him. And so I would say that success, the true definition of success, found me. I wasn't looking for it. I got out here and my initial goals were not to help people. It was to replicate the successes that we'd had in Iraq, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Libya, blah, 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 and it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to get it all back. I mean, I'm too old for that anyway, but it was like, but I hadn't given up either. And it was like, this is something that I have the skills to do. We're qualified to do. We've got the, financial the capacity to do it. So, it wasn't me trying to, this late in life, grab for the hill one more time, but it was something that I knew I could do. When I got here, and I'm not going to bore everyone with the story again and again, but you interact with these people one-on-one, you see their sacrifice, you see their stories, and you look, and if 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 you have some form of like, empathy, not sympathy, if you have some form of empathy or even as shallow as there's still some compassion in there. If you walk away unaltered by what these people are really doing, then you're really not a person that anyone should want to associate with. And that led me to saying, well, success is really not what we do here, but like page 176, is or what Stephen showed on the screen. I mean, are there people that are benefiting? Is a multiplier effect me being able to use the skills and the resources that I've been gifted and earned through a lifetime of experience for the betterment of those around me instead of the betterment of myself? And maybe it's very personal, but I don't think you can just turn a switch and say, you know what, I'm going to stop being selfish. I'm going to stop having it all about me or what's in it for me or what my goals are. I'm not going to summarily dismiss those and just be very altruistic, singing Kumbaya and passing out flowers in a corner of Haight and Ashbury, which is in San Francisco, by the way. Just keeping it real for everybody. And so I had to make a decision, and I've never been more at peace, more content. And I'll tell you, somebody asked me the other day on another call, I love giving them mattresses. I mean, I just love donating them because
I could see that in all the photos you've displayed.
Okay.
It oozes through.
All right. Well, thank you. I mean, but it really, I in my whole life, I would have never. I mean, I was such an egotistical kid that I would let dogs out of the backyard and I would go get them and then take them back to their owners and say, hey, look, I brought your dog back. Wow. And I didn't put that on my essay to get into business school, but I thought it was quite clever at the time until I got caught. But here, you're actually able to make a material difference. And I never thought I'd be able to do that. And I never had that feeling before, or allowed myself to have that feeling before, or put myself in a position where that feeling could occur. And you're right in the middle of it. You see what real sacrifice is. You see the kind of the shallowness of what I had been pursuing all of these years, and to what end. So I love Home Essentials. I love my job. I mean, I love what we've done. The ups and the downs, but defining success, I would say, I'm in alignment with Stephen, and that, it's really, if this is how my career ends, then, fantastic.
Dr. Ken Lloyd, I think we need a shrink session here before we go to Christian and Rigo.
Oh, you got to understand that I speak as a third generation San Franciscan, which is the truth. And grandfather was born there in 1872 in what we call the city. Even though I'm in Southern Cal, San Francisco is still the city. Speaking of success, I just totally relate to what Stephen and Chris have said here, that the greatest feelings of success, obviously, people measure it in their own way. Great successes, small successes, it varies. For some people, it's how much money do I have? For others, it's just, what did I leave here? What did I do there? For me personally, and I think for listening to Stephen and to Chris, it's great success comes from helping others. As Stephen used, happiness and helping them learn and making them feel better. That's such a rewarding experience. So we set various goals for ourselves, small and large. As we meet them, there is some experience of success. We all experience differently. Someone can have what we would regard as a major success, and they all say, well, I could have done this, I could have done that. Others will have minor successes, and think, look, I just conquered the world, and aren't I great? And you get this great hubris coming out of it. So we look at ourselves and what is our own definition of success. And I find that if I do something, I really look at it in a humany mindset without even knowing the word humany until I met Stephen, that how has this really helped other people? What has it done for those around me, for, if you will, society at large? What's the good that really comes from it? And for me personally, if I look back at things I've done, my mindset is, what could I have done better? How could I have made this more relevant, more meaningful, more helpful? That's just, I don't look back and say, wow, I'm really happy with that. That's just not how I approach life. It's a concept of doing right, my dad used to say, you do well by doing good. And I truly believe that, and doing good is really at the heart of it. And I do want to note to Stephen, though, that your frequent flyer, your mileage, your right to go into these lounges, I don't look at that as entitlement. I think you've earned it. You know, you've spent the money, you've spent the time, you've earned that. To me, entitlement is when people claim things that aren't theirs at all, but just sort of handed to them, unearned, unmerited, unwarranted, and still walking around like they're bigger and better than everyone. That's what I see as entitlement. And Steve, yeah, you've earned it. Get in that lounge, and if you want to be nicer to the customer care people, that's fine. But yeah, you got it. And frankly, you are entitled to that by having earned it.
Christian.
So when I thought about success and then ended up suggesting this topic to Ed for a show, I thought about two things. I thought about the saying, a shroud has no pockets, meaning you can't take any material assets with you when you're dead. And then the second thing I thought of as somebody who's an immigrant is the pursuit of happiness that the Americans have in their constitution, and kind of nobody else that I'm aware of has that like that. So you think about, what does success and that pursuit of happiness have to do with each other? And what does that have to do with a shroud has no pockets? And the answer you come to is that, yes, you can define success as material success. And that was the thing that and Ed said, and he sometimes says that, you know, somebody's very successful in the sense of they've built a company, not just that they have money, but they built a company, they earned that money, they have a lot of employees, maybe a lot of power. But what does that mean when, for instance, you're lonesome? When you don't really have any true friends and your relationships with people are shallow? What does that mean if your time is being eaten up by fighting divorce cases, or have estranged children? And I've moved a lot of people, okay? And relocation brings out a lot of these stories eventually in some shape or form. So is success really the pursuit of just material happiness? Or is it what Chris is talking about, a happiness that is deeper and comes from different sources than just having things?
What slide do you have to show us?
Well, the slide is, let's see, I have to get it. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Oh. Hang on. No?
Yeah, part of
Yeah.
it. What do all the lines mean?
The lines are just background.
Mhm.
They don't mean anything. They're just background. They're a template. I stole that from Microsoft, who offered it to me. So they were just, if there's just a few thoughts here of success, how people could define success. And we've covered a lot of them. Material, success in love, which we haven't really talked about that much. Success in relationship with family and friends. We've touched on that. Success in health and well-being. That's definitely something that's in Stephen's book. That's something that someone like Mehibe, who we've mentioned, would talk about. Success in building an organization. Chris talked about that, and we're talking about that often on this show. And then at the end, what I'm talking about right now, success in personal happiness. So just a few thoughts I threw together to help us discuss this.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. That'll become permanent on the streamed version of this. Rigo, welcome again.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah. So what do you think of all this locker room talk?
Well, it's a lot of information to process for myself, but I think everybody has his own definition of success. And I guess myself, I keep constantly changing that definition because at some point I realized that I was wrong. Sometimes I realized that I was, in the right direction. So perhaps success is also, maybe from my own perspective, always being aware of that at some point we need to change our path or direction or what we are doing. It's subject to change or to adapt to new things. And in that way, we can pursue always how we can be better or having a better version of ourselves. But yeah, I think there's a lot of theory on that regard. I got the comment from Steven. He was saying something that sometimes we get a good advice, or we hear or we read a good advice, but we don't follow that advice. And personally, I like philosophy, and I just read a book many years ago where I found that sometimes we don't follow an idea because just the way that it sounds, just because of the tone that we hear that idea. So no, it's just my own feeling, but yeah, I think there are many good ideas around us, but sometimes we don't see them because they don't sound good for us at the first glance. But it's just a matter of recalibrating our mindset and perhaps watch from another perspective. But yeah, I don't know if those are my 2 cents head on that thing.
Rico,
Thank you.
what are you thinking about when you said right or wrong earlier? How do you define that for yourself?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, very pragmatic way to see that. It's like comparing myself when I was single and now that I'm married and I have a son. Just by the fact of having someone else who is following my steps behind me, who is my little boy of 7 years old, then I realized that I was doing a lot of things wrong. And then, perhaps I already knew that, but yeah, I mean, someone else who is watching your back, he always remember me that where is good or where is wrong by the way he repeats what I do. And because he just copy paste my habits. But yeah, I mean, defining good or bad, it's beyond my capabilities. It's perhaps a little bit more deeper. But yeah, I think at the end, it's just a matter of having your own perspective, and as I said, being aware that at some point what you choose today, it doesn't have to be the right decision for tomorrow. So you need to be aware on tomorrow to realize that what you choose yesterday, it was wrong, or probably not wrong, but it's just a matter of changing paths and always keep constantly changing, which is, I think this is the universe is all about keep constantly changing from my perspective.
That is really meaningful. The minute you said that about your son, 7 years old, mirroring you, it took me back to, yeah, like when I was a kid, I mirrored some of the things my dad had done that I could recall. But that's that's a beautiful passage. Thank you for talking about that. Stephen?
Yeah, it's great, great contribution, Rigoberto, and you know, you're definitely right. And you know, and one of the things I point out in the book or encourage people in the book to do is just bring more peacefulness into the world. So, you know, we're not talking in the book about solving hunger or the Middle East crisis. I mean, it'd be wonderful if we could, and you know, maybe Chris will do that next year if he finishes this year's to-do list. But you know, it's just simple things of you know, being more peaceful with one another. And one thing I encourage in the book and encourage your audience, Ed, is you know, there's so much nastiness out there. There's so much violence out there, particularly on social media. And you know, we see videos of fights of fans in stadiums, baseball parks, football stadiums, whatever. And I, you know, one thing I've done is I stopped forwarding those. I mean, you know, they're dramatic, they're interesting to watch, but I'm not adding to the peacefulness of the world by sharing that in my social media feed. So I just refuse to now. And, you know, I refuse to share memes that poke fun at an individual or at a group of individuals or a gender or a community. It's like, what? Yeah, they're funny. We all like jokes. We can all, you know, I can tell you some of the greatest jokes from my international experience, but that's not adding to our peacefulness and humanity. And so just stop forwarding that kind of stuff. Be more compassionate and kind.
So, Chris, on the last program you were on, or maybe it was the one prior, you talked about Ukraine and how it's suffering and basically falling apart from within. And it's sort of like what the Russians have set out to do. It, and it's just, I'm just being careful with what I'm saying right now, but there's still an EU or IMF or one of the big organizations organizing $50 billion loan, quote unquote, to Ukraine. But your insight the other day has stuck with me clearly and ringing bells right now in my head about then they, you said, are not going to rebuild Ukraine. So why are they spending all this money? And where's that money going to go?
Well, the money's going to go, first off, this $50 billion loan that's being administered by the European Union has been in the offing for the past 4 or 5 months. And it's based upon frozen assets, mostly in Belgium, through Euroclear, which are SWIFT transactions.
So
And
that is Russian money that's
yes,
being
it's
held
Russian.
in trust.
Right. So there's right now there's about 350 some odd billion of Russian government money, not including frozen assets of Putin or other individuals or companies. And that money is frozen in banks in Switzerland and in SWIFT payment transfers and accounts in Brussels and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And so what's happened is they're saying, well, there's so much money there that with these new interest rates, it's actually producing interest. That interest, you know, without touching the principal, will be able to fund and guarantee these loans. And it makes sense, and yet it still hasn't gotten done. We talk about $50 billion, and that's a massive number on any metric, until you realize that the government of Ukraine's budget for next year is a $3 billion a month deficit. Now, what that means is that they're running a fiscal deficit of $36 billion a year. I don't want to get really, I love numbers. I don't want to go down into this about current accounts, the lack of FDI, you know, and government debt now is hit 100% of GDP. You know, but the government just did. We paid our taxes yesterday again. The government raised all the taxes, made it retroactive, which basically puts more of a shadow economy, more people into a shadow economy, which then increasingly puts the burden on those of us that pay taxes to pay more. And then if you're a retailer, you've got you've got an economic disadvantage because you're dealing with taxes that are now 25% of revenue. Just think about it. 25% of your revenue is tax, and your competitors down the street aren't paying that. And so, but to the point, yeah, 50, every scenario from an economic perspective that I and my team look at for Ukraine becomes more dire. And no one, see, that's the other thing, and Ken and Stephen and Christian, this from relocation, but you try to talk to people about this and they don't want to hear it. They say, oh, well, we're going to give $50 billion. I'm giving a speech, and I'm shocked that I've been asked, but I'm giving a speech to the National Association of Mayors on the 8th, about this very subject, but nobody wants to talk about it. No one talks about a return on invested capital, cash conversion cycles, equity investments. They have this donor mentality, which I guess to Stephen's point is somewhat of a mentality of entitlement. There is a huge mentality of entitlement with these local governments that believe, well, we're suffering, so therefore we're entitled to people giving money to us with no accountability. And the needs are there, but you've got to instill in these people that in order to attract investment, you have to provide companies and Western companies that it's a good investment. I tell people we're not an NGO. We're a company that has a compassionate division to it. And go ahead, Christian.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but what I'm thinking about when I hear all this is the Marshall Plan, right? And which is, I mean, my dad's family benefited from that ultimately. My dad was born in June 1945, and if people hadn't been aware and done a few things, he could have starved. So I wouldn't exist. And what happened with my dad and many other people of that generation as little kids, they were able to grow up because, among other things, of the Marshall Plan. The Americans investing into the broken, infrastructure of Germany that they first had to somehow and somewhat denazify, and to build up companies until these companies were successful. Great example would be Volkswagen, that I know, Stephen, you've talked about, and other scammers, but that's beside the point. But the Volkswagen Beetle, that came out of the Americans taking over the factory in Wolfsburg and making sure that something was being produced. And I see this as very similar, the idea that we're helping a country that's gone through a war by investing, but not with we're the generous givers and you're the poor takers, that also vice versa then feel entitled to take what you're giving us.
That, and Ed knows this. I'm selling, furniture and delivering mattresses by day, but I'm also a qualified contractor, which means that I'm in some of these meetings in Berlin and Brussels. And I know the people at the German Marshall Fund, Washington, the CEPR. A Marshall Plan will not work here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you got to remember, because in Germany and in Japan, I think I said this on an earlier program, in Japan, we had Douglas MacArthur. So, I mean, he, by just sheer force of who he was, could do anything. I mean, he wrote the Constitution of Japan that they have today by hand on a legal pad. And in Germany, we were an occupier. The central government of Ukraine is too inefficient, incompetent, understaffed, and underfunded to administer any type of Marshall Plan. And the bigger problem that you have is that there is such a demographic decline. And I've said this in the programs before, and now, you know, it's coming up almost daily. The number of Ukrainians that say that they're going to come back diminishes by the week, and they're setting up new lives. The mortality rate here, as I've said before, is 3 deaths for every birth, non-military. The average age is getting older. The pension system, people can retire at 60. The pension system is bankrupt. And, you know, you've also got the clutches of an agrarian society. Now, Germany had especially West Germany, they had an industrial complex like Japan had that could be rebuilt. Those things don't exist here. You have to build them from scratch, and there aren't enough people to work in the factories. You know, I mean, Germany, you had a certain number of people that were, you know, dropping arms and then looking for jobs, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I'm not saying blah, blah, blah to discount it. I'm just saying that, you know,
It's a long story.
It is a long story. And let's not forget, the Marshall Plan didn't occur until 48, 3 years
Yeah.
after the surrender. And the Marshall Plan only came into effect because Truman realized that this whole thing was months away from just collapsing even worse than the Weimar Republic after World War I. So all I'm saying is that if people aren't willing to face up to the reality of the situation, nothing good can change. It just engenders a succession of struggles that takes everything to the brink of disaster. Ken, you can probably explain this. I don't know why people would rather believe these scenarios that the currency for reconstruction is frozen Russian assets. It's as simple as, you know, going to a teller at a UBS branch in Geneva and saying, bonjour, you know, may we please have $10 billion today, s'il vous plaît? Ah, no, avec plaisir, avec vitesse, maintenant. You know, I mean, that's French, by the way. But, you know, I'm Christian, I'm not trying to make fun of this. They're huge problems. And I think I said this before, the central government's own agency for restoration and rebuilding has identified 213 projects, of which 29%, 83, have been fully funded. We're almost 3 years into this, 2.5 years of death and destruction. And the entire federal government has only completed fully funded 83 projects. And they've partially funded and fully funded projects worth about 450 billion, which is 2% of the lowest estimate of total destruction. $450 million when the destruction is 200 billion at least. So you're going to tell me that somehow this central government, after 2.5 years, can only complete 89 projects, partially fund others worth about 450 million US dollars, and somehow they're going to receive money as part of a Marshall Plan and then magically be able to rebuild this nation when there's no one to do the rebuilding. They don't have enough space planners, they don't have enough architects, they can't get the supplies in here, and they have no way of doing it. And there's no way of and they're not even coordinating with the local mayors and so I'm here. It's not that I'm a pessimist. I believe there's opportunity. If there wasn't, I'd go back to Hong Kong. But at some point, when we're trying to talk about success, we're talking about success of a nation. We're talking about the success of not the 44 million that lived here in 2020, but the 38 million that live here today, and the 29 million that'll live here in 2030. If there isn't a narrative of success and Stephen, a definition of what success means, so that everyone can, and I'm an executive. You don't run companies by fiat. You've got to run companies so that there's buy-in. And we all know that. I mean, as a manager, you've got to have buy-in. If any one of you can show me one article where this country of Ukraine has sought the buy-in to define what success after The Guns Stop Means for Ukrainians. I'd like to read it.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Well, we're talking about success in its many forms and colors, and unsuccess, the opposite. Where do we go from here? Let's talk about what can be done in terms of U.S. community colleges as a bridge into trade school education rather than liberal arts education in college. And in California, it works. In Southern California in particular, the community colleges are bridges into the state system, and they seem to work. I haven't heard any negative stories, but I don't know much about that. I think, Christian, you have a lot more specific knowledge about that. Using the community college system as a bridge to bigger and better things.
Yeah, I do through my older daughter Angelica, who's been on the show, who is clearly pursuing an academic career, but a lot of the people that she's now a tutor, she's part-time employee of the college, and a lot of the people that she works with are going to go into the job market. They're going to go into the business world in some shape or form, and some of them will go into a trade. I am very much in favor of this because for two reasons. One, a lot of the trade jobs can be outsourced. Plumber would be an example. Anything with construction. And the other thing is that I come from a system that is based on apprenticeships. Both in Switzerland and Germany, you have a system that ties an apprenticeship to a school education. And my middle brother, who is now in that sense, successful businessman, went through that. He did not pursue a college degree. Instead, he learned how to fix radios and TV sets, and then parlayed this into computer games eventually. And it is a very good way of doing things in my mind. And I'm glad that California has kind of woken up to that. It's desperately needed.
Yeah. So we're looking for examples of success, and it comes in different stripes, colors, sizes. So, Stephen, is that a book?
Not for me. Probably is. There certainly is success stories and everything. I'll share one though that I've heard about sort of recently, within the last couple of years, which I just find fascinating, is that Notre Dame University, in their College of Engineering, they're now teaching leadership programs. So, you think of the typical engineering degree, whether architectural engineering or civic engineering or aerospace engineering, whatever, all the different disciplines that they have within that portion of the college. Most engineers never are exposed to leadership principles, leadership practices. And yet when they go in the world, they have to start leading teams and interacting with others and leading outside suppliers. So I think and I'm sure other universities are doing it. I'm just not aware of any. I do know the one at the University of Notre Dame, and I just think that's a great combination of taking so-called liberal arts and putting it into the engineering school. So I just share that with you.
Ken?
I think also to develop success, we have to have an open mind to the input, expertise, creativity of others so that we're not stuck in a box and doing the same thing over and over again, whether it's been successful or hasn't been. Big picture, I think it would be, well, Chris cannot be the next president of Ukraine. To have Chris and several other brilliant business minds like his meet with the leadership of the country to perhaps open up their thinking and creativity and get them onto a better path of success, just as all of us can use the ideas, inputs, and suggestions of respected others in reforging our paths toward success. I think that's something that we need. And there's often a lot of resistance, whether it's in the business world or in the geopolitical world, to listening to new ideas, particularly ideas that are different from those that those in power positions might hold. And I think that to change the world, to change companies, to change our own course and levels of success, we need to be open and even solicit ideas, inputs, creativity from others, as well as, if you will, feedback and feed forward, so that we can continue our learning and growth. And I think that what Chris explained regarding Ukraine was extremely informative and educational, and it ties right into, all right, how are they really going to get to success? It's not going to be by working behind closed doors. It's just not.
So what do you think, Chris, about the North Koreans coming in?
I'm probably of the consensus mindset that it's a sense of desperation on Russia's part, because the biggest fear that Putin has is a conscription of Russian citizens. I think it's also you're dealing with people that have, when we talk about success, for Putin and Kim Jong-un, their success is only about protecting what they already have. And if you look at the flagrant, the amount of life that's been lost by Putin's decisions, Kim Jong-un doesn't care. So he is looking at this in some ways, as disgustingly twisted as it is. He wants his soldiers to get some battle experience, because none of his soldiers, and frankly, none of the people in the PLA, the Army of China, have any tested battle experience. And so he wants to use this in a way to determine how effective his troops are. Now, I don't have access to confidential information. The North Korean troops that have arrived have better equipment than the Russian troops. These North Korean troops that have arrived have already dealt in training in frozen environments. These North Korean troops that arrived have gone through war games and simulations. And it's just shocking to me that these North Korean troops have better equipment. And I'm not talking about Kalashnikovs. I'm talking about night vision goggles, thermal underwear, boots, food rations, utility belts than the Russian army do. And what's already happened also is you've had the first contingent of North Koreans that have left their station, which in Western world we'd say is mutiny or AWOL or something like that. They left because they were trying to radio in, what do we do? How do we do it? And they could communicate with no one. So they were actually, this is just the insanity of this. Talk about, you deploy North Korean troops to a forward position. You give them no direction on what to do. They have no idea. They're calling in for help. They don't know what, and no one can talk to them. And so they leave. And so then they're detained. What it does prove is, and again, we don't want to get national US politics involved. There was never any goodwill negotiation. And we had this on our, Kim Jong-un had no intention of ever giving up his nuclear weapons. And you see that now. And you see that with this, roulage à jouer, or this charade of the BRICS summit in Kazan, where, it's like all of a sudden this alternative to, the Western-led world order. North Korea is just doing this and let's be truly honest about this. Kim Jong-un can't get on his train without the permission of China. If it wasn't for China, every single person in North Korea would probably starve to death. Okay. If it wasn't for China, there would be no utilities in North Korea. So all of this is being done with the orchestrated acquiescence of Xi Jinping. And, you know, and so how do you define success when you've got so many bad actors that are willing to allow the death and the brutal death, and not only allow the brutal death, hastening it by putting these people into harm's way, knowing that they're going to die. I feel like I'm a pretty optimistic guy. I don't mean, you know, I mean, it's not happy Friday. I mean, but you know, it's oh my gosh. But yeah, so North Korea, you know, 10,000 troops, does it make a difference? In the press it does, on the battlefield it doesn't, but if you put troops onto a front line and you can't talk to them and tell them what to do, what do you expect?
So
You know, where are they supposed to go? They don't speak Russian. Where do they go east? Do they go west? Do they engage? Do they fall back? Do they liaise? What if someone's injured? I mean, it's just I'm not a soldier, but it's military 101.
So this is breaking news, because I read the Wall Street Journal, New York Times every day, and I have not heard that, seen that reporting.
Well, to Chris's point, in the LA Times today, there is a story saying that the Russian troops basically don't know what in the world to do with these soldiers from North Korea. They're just, what do we do with them? What are they supposed to do? So it's kind of the same point that Chris was making from the other side. The Russians don't know what to do with them. All of a sudden, here are all these new fighters, if you will, that are part of their so-called team. They don't know what to do with them.
They have language problems, among other things.
At the very least, yeah.
So thank you guys for being on this program, and the quality of your talking, reporting, if you will, and sharing is exemplary. I'm really honored to have this recording going forward. The world will see this. And if you have any thoughts about why did I say that or anything like that, tell me, and I can do some rudimentary editing, but I'm not a good editor.
If I could just close out on one thing, you know, Stephen, I don't want you to think that you're alone. You're not the only one who has been rude to gate agents or people in an Admirals Club, okay? I'm almost positive Ken has as well.
Who, me?
I've had my moments of, you know, don't you know, do I have to explain this to you? So, you know, let's go on arm in arm, Stephen, on this weekend, and you have a kindred spirit over here, and together we'll hold an accountability group on being nicer to the people at the Admirals Clubs.
You know,
I've go into Delta lounges, and I've never been rude to anybody. They're just great, graceful people.
Chris, there's the old story from the 1980s of a TWA flight that got grounded for mechanical errors, and somebody comes running up, some male executive goes running up to the counter and says, "I got to get on the next flight. You got to do something for me. Don't you know who I am?" And the counter staff went on the PA announcement and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have someone here who doesn't know who he is. Can anybody help us out?" Which I sometimes I fear they might have said they were going to say that to me sometime, but I just always remember that story from TWA, which dates me.
Oh, and with that, thank you all.
Thank you.
Happy
I'll send-
Friday.
I'll
Stay
send you a
safe,
copy
Chris.
of this thing. Cheers.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Bye.
See you on
Well,
the
guys.
see you on the next broadcast.
Mhm.
Thanks.